Okay, so as always, today's lesson, today's session will be available on YouTube later today. Okay, so let's get into the class proper. So as I mentioned last week, we're going to be starting we're going to be studying on abortion this week. Yeah, and it's an interesting topic in its own right, but it's also interesting because I think it helps us to see, it helps us to see the implications of all the things that we have been thinking about, in terms of rights and liberties and all that. Abortion is a very good place in which all of these various ideas of rights and liberties come into play. Right. So for today, I'm basically going to be focusing on. I'm mainly going to be focusing on that paper by Judith Jarvis Thompson, A Defense of Abortion. And then Thursday, I'm going to be looking at Marquis' paper, Why Abortion is Immoral, and also I'll also be looking at the response to Marquis by Walter Sinnott Armstrong. I hope you had a chance to. Hopefully you have had a chance to look at this paper by Thompson. Um, Let me start by saying a few general things about it. So let me share something with you. Okay, so I came up with some very brief notes on this Thompson paper. It's basically to give you a sense of where she is coming from. You don't have to take any notes here. I've already posted this on Moodle. Okay, so Thompson starts by, well, what she's trying to do is very clear from the title of her paper. She's trying to defend abortion. And this paper was written in the early 1970s. I believe in 1971, just before Roe v. Wade. It is in many ways a groundbreaking, pioneering paper because some of the things that she says would be familiar to people like us today. However, during this, during the early 70s before Roe v. Wade, people didn't have the idea that people didn't necessarily they weren't familiar with the idea that that a woman's right to her own body can actually in some ways be more important than a fetus right to life. So this is groundbreaking because to my knowledge, this is the first philosophical paper and maybe even the first, any kind of paper that talks about this idea that perhaps in many cases, the woman's right to a body can actually outweigh the fetus' right to life. Okay, but let's start from the beginning. So, in one very common strategy in philosophy, as you hopefully have noticed by now, is that when you're trying to argue for a particular view that you believe in, you actually start by looking at the view that is you actually start by looking at the opposing view. You start by looking at the opposing view and thinking about where the other person is coming from, and then you basically try to show that the opposing view is wrong in some way. And this is basically what Thompson does. Before she argues that abortion is defensible, is okay, she actually starts by looking at the opposition. So the opposition, we can call it the standard anti-abortion or the standard pro-life argument. So Thompson basically starts the paper by saying this. The standard anti-abortion argument has these five premises. It looks something like this. So usually they will start by, if you are against abortion, you might start by saying that a fetus is a person from the moment of conception, and then a person, right? A person has a right to life. We can all agree about that. And any action which deliberately terminates a person's life infringes upon that person's right to life. Well, we can also agree on that. Um, and then, since abortion deliberately terminates the life of the fetus, and the fetus is a person, abortion infringes upon the fetus' right to life. Therefore, assuming that it is wrong to infringe upon somebody's right to life, abortion is wrong, and therefore may not be performed. Okay, you will see in a little bit, you will see presently that what Thompson tries to do is actually, she actually tries to argue against three. Three says that any action which deliberately terminates a person's life infringes upon the person's right to life. Is that always true? Is it always true that an action which deliberately terminates a person's life infringes upon a person's right to life? Okay, so hold that thought. Maybe think a little bit about whether number three is always true. Okay, but while you're holding that thought, let's move forward for a little. Let's move forward for right now. So most people who defend against, most people who try to argue against this pro-life argument, they basically try to defend abortion by arguing against one, right? Most people would, you probably are familiar with this. If you are trying to defend abortion, you might say something like, the fetus is not really a person from the moment of conception. You might say something like, when sperm meets egg and form an embryo is just a clump of cells. And a clump of cells is not, whatever you want to call it, a clump of cells is not a person. So the standard strategy to defend abortion is to say that, look, a fetus cannot be a person from conception because if you look at an embryo, for example, an embryo cannot be a person. It's just a clump of cells. It takes a lot more to be a person. If this is a strategy you're taking, then there's a lot of back and forth, right? If the person who is pro-abortion would say, well, a fetus is not a person, and then a person who is against abortion would say, look, the fetus is a person. And then usually what happens is that they'll get into, both parties will get into some kind of a big argument about they'll get into a big disagreement about when fetuses become persons, right? Some people will say, maybe 3 months, maybe 4 months, maybe 7 months. So what Thompson does is Thompson decides to take a different strategy. She doesn't want to get into this, she doesn't want to get into this back and forth about what counts as a person. So she just says, look, why don't you just agree? Why don't you just agree with the anti-abortion person that, we can just agree that a fetus is a person from the moment of conception, right? We can just, even if it sounds wrong, we can just agree with them that an embryo is a person. But what she's saying is that, look, even if an embryo is a person, even if we agree that an embryo is a person, it still doesn't follow. It still doesn't follow that. It is always wrong to perform an abortion. Why? Because if you are a person, if you are a person, you have a right to life, right? And what does it mean to have a right to life? Okay, remember from last week that if you have a right to X, then people have a duty not to prevent you from X. Okay, so if you have a right to life, that means that people have a duty not to prevent you from living. Okay, that seems correct. But if I have a duty to prevent you from, if I have a duty not to prevent you from living, does that mean that I have a duty to give you absolutely everything you need to live? Does it mean that I have a duty to give you absolutely anything you need to stay alive? Well, it's not so clear. Again, most people who are not thinking, if you're not thinking about this very carefully, you will think, of course, right? If I have a right to life and if you have a duty not to prevent me from living, then surely that means that you have a duty to give me everything, absolutely everything I need to stay alive. Okay, so but what if the thing that I need to stay alive is something that is very important to you? What if the only way I can stay alive is for you to give up all your life savings in order to spend money on something that will save my life? And further, what if the thing that I need to stay alive is something that you also need to stay alive and get around with? So what if the thing that I need to stay alive is your body? So imagine I'm a fetus, right? And you are pregnant with me. So what if the thing that I need to stay alive is your body? What if you have to, give up your body or or restrict your body in some in some way, for a long time, maybe 9 months, in order for me to stay alive. Do I do I if I have a right to life, do you automatically have a duty to give me your body in order to stay alive? Um, so I don't know what you think about all of this, but I think you can see that what Thompson is trying to do is that she's trying to say that, look, having the right to life is not a blank check. Having a right to life does not entitle you to everything under the universe you need to stay alive. Um, Especially the thing that you need is something that is very important to another person. Um, Okay, so all of this is probably very abstract. So in order to to get clear about this idea, she says, look, let's think about an example. Let's not think about pregnancy directly for the time being. Let me give you a couple of examples to get you to think about this. So one example that Thompson gives is the famous violinist example. She comes out with the famous violinist example to make her point. Okay, so let me stop the share for a moment. Okay, does I don't know how many of you have read the reading, but can somebody here say something about? Do you remember what is the famous violinist example? Matthew.
Yeah, the example is that you were kidnapped by the music lover agency or this person's fan, and they also kidnapped the violin and plugged you into the violin so that your organs could sustain this violinist that I think had like kidney failure or something. But just
Yeah.
and so the idea was like the while the violin player has the right to life, it doesn't have the right to your blood and stuff.
Yeah, yeah, good, good. So you're plugged into the, so you have been plugged into the violinist's body. So okay, so you wake up one morning. The story is something like this, right? So you wake up one morning and you mysteriously find yourself in a hospital bed, and there are all these tubes and all these tubes and all these things that are being plugged into your kidneys. And then you look next to you and you realize that all these tubes are running from your kidney into the kidney of this famous musician, this famous violinist. So you have been so and then the at this time the director of the hospital comes around and says, look, I'm very sorry that this happened, but in the middle of the night you were kidnapped. You were kidnapped by a bunch of music lovers. These people are fans of the violinist, and they found that you alone of all people have the right blood type. So apparently, the violinist has a very rare blood type, and you alone of all people have the right blood type to be able to save him. So this guy is suffering from the violinist is suffering from some really serious kidney disease or something, and standard dialysis is not going to work. So the only way to save his life is to hook up your kidneys to his kidneys so that your kidneys can perform the function of detoxing his kidneys. Um, okay, so and then he says to you, look, I know this is really inconvenient, but fortunately, it's only going to be for 9 months. You're just going to be hooked up to his body for 9 months. After 9 months, his kidneys will have recovered and regained their function, and then you are free to go. But for the next 9 months, you are well. I know you didn't choose. I know you didn't choose this. But for the next 9 months, you're going to have to be hooked up to his kidneys, and so you're going to have to stay in bed next to him for the next 9 months. Uh, Okay, so and then he says to you, look, you can't unplug yourself because if you do, you will die, right? And he has a right to life. He's innocent and he has a right to life. And his right to life is more important than your right to control, than your right to your own body. So if the right to life is more important than the right to your own body, then then the moral of the story, the upshot is that you're obligated to stay hooked to him for the next 9 months. Okay, so that's the story. Uh, um, Well, I don't know what is the first question I should ask. Maybe the first question I should ask is so you can probably see that this is he's not talking about pregnancy directly, but it's kind of like pregnancy. You didn't maybe it's kind of like a pregnancy. Maybe it's like somebody who got pregnant by being raped or something. They didn't ask for a fetus or any for they didn't ask for somebody to be in their body or to be hooked up in their body, but there they are. So what Thompson is trying to show with this example is that, doesn't it make, I mean, if you agree in this sense that it is ridiculous, if you agree that in this case it is ridiculous to expect you to continue to be hooked up to the violinist's body, uh, if you agree that it's ridiculous to expect you to continue to allow your kidneys to be used by the violinist, then you should also agree that at least sometimes it is okay to at least sometimes it is okay to end a pregnancy because uh, because of just like the violinist doesn't have a right to your body, just because he has a right to life. In the same way, a fetus also doesn't have the right to a body, to your body, just because it has a right to life. So yeah, what do you guys think of this argument? Do you think it I don't know. I mean, do you think it gives you do you think it presents a good case for saying that fetuses don't have a right to use your body, Matthew?
I think it does have a good case towards in the case of like rape, like in the situation where it's involuntary, you know, because in that case, um, personally, I think that there are other ways, but I do agree that it wasn't your choice in the case of rape. But in a different case, even if the pregnancy wasn't intentional, that is a risk of doing whatever you're doing to get pregnant. And
Hmm.
like, so it kind of breaks down there. And I'm not saying that babies are punishments because they're like, a baby should never be a punishment. You know, I think
Yeah.
that raising a child is like the most important thing in society because that's how you extend society. So I would argue that maybe society has a duty to raise children because otherwise society could not continue to exist. But I don't, but in the case of, I agree with this example in the case of rape, but it kind of breaks down once it stops being rape.
Hmm. Interesting. And I think you are not the first person to make this observation. It's kind of tricky. It's kind of tricky to say that it breaks down once it's not rape, because then it sounds like you are saying that babies that are not the product of rape have more of a right to life than babies that are the product of rape, which sounds really not which sounds really weird, because, well, whether or not I am conceived from rape, well, it's not my fault, right? It's not my fault if I'm the product of a rape. I didn't choose that way. I didn't choose to be a product of rape. So it'll be very strange if you were to tell me that I have less of a right to life just because I was a product of a rape, Matthew.
I think there is a distinction there between the right to life. The right to life is universal with all the humans, but it's the responsibility of the parents, because it's not just the mother that's responsible for the child. Like the father is also responsible, and we have laws that try to hold the father responsible. And personally, I think they should be strengthened, those laws. But both parents are responsible for the child, and you're responsible for your child in addition to your children's right to life.
Hmm.
A child has the right to no, I don't want to say right to parents because that's not the way to put it, but parents have the responsibility to provide for their children in addition to their children being a right to life.
Interesting. Yeah. So maybe in a case of, okay, let's talk about a so-called normal pregnancy first. The kind in which that is not the result of rape. This is a normal pregnancy in which both parties want a child. So if both in a normal pregnancy where both the mother and the father want to bring a child into this world, then what happens is that, yeah, it's like as you say, the mother and but perhaps the mother and the father acquire, come to be responsible. They come to be responsible for the child the moment the child is conceived. Um, and in that case, if the so in that case, it's still true. I think it's still true that a child doesn't have a it's still true that a child is not entitled to the use of the parent's body, including the mom's body, in order to come into this world. But in this case, perhaps because of the responsibility that they have assumed, the mother now has a responsibility to use her body. Because she has assumed the responsibility of using her body to bring a child into this world, and so the child gets to come into this world because because the parents have voluntarily taken on the responsibility of bringing the child into this world. Uh, so, so that's really interesting because that means that all of us came into this world because our parents, we came into this world not really because we have a right to life, but we came into this world because our parents assumed the responsibility of using their bodies to bring us into this world. Um, and that's great. Um, and the difference between this and the rape case is that in the rape case, because it was involuntary, the mother did not assume the responsibility of bringing a child into this world, and therefore, and because the child doesn't have a right to be entitled to the mother's body in the first place, therefore she's not doing anything wrong if she decides not to carry through with the pregnancy. So it's almost like, if you go back to the musician case, the violinist case, it's almost like if you somehow, in order to, if you want to change the violinist case to something that resembles a normal pregnancy, you'll be like, maybe the violinist has not done you a big favor in the past, right? Maybe I don't know. Maybe you took a bunch of music lessons from him. You took a bunch of free music lessons from him, and then now he's in. Now he needs your body to survive the next 9 months, and so perhaps because of that, you have a responsibility to use your body to save his life, because maybe the idea is that you have assumed responsibility for this based on your past relationship with the violinist. And so the idea maybe is that, maybe the keyword is responsibility and relationship. The idea is that parents or mothers bring children into this world because they have voluntarily formed a relationship with the fetus. Um, yeah, interesting. Matthew.
Um, I would say that it's not just mothers that have that responsibility because, like, every child has at least two genetic parents, and I think that the one of the reasons why abortion is such a hot issue is because in the current set of laws and situations, a father can walk away from a pregnancy, but a mother can never do that unless if they have an abortion. And it seems to be this idea of, oh, we're going to make women equally disresponsible for it, when it really should be we should make both parents, make the men as responsible for the child as the women are, whether that be like financially, so providing for the mother and the child when the pregnancy, or I don't know how you would do that, but I feel like that's a more, maybe not be the most um instead of focusing on rights kind of idea, focus on more of a duty based idea. Like the father has just as much of a responsibility as the mother, and so instead of trying to make it easier for um, responsibility to be shed, make it harder for the father so that it's shared between the two of them.
I agree with that statement. I feel like if you put yourself, I know rape, you don't really put yourself in that position. Like, that's just something that happens sometimes. But like, if in a case where you put yourself in a position where you have an unwanted pregnancy, I agree with Matthew. You should put both parents responsible for it.
Yeah, I agree too. I mean, if both parents contributed to the process of creating the fetus, then I think I would agree that it's correct that both parents should have responsibility for it. And I think I think our laws actually try to reflect that. I mean, they require they in most cases, they require the dad to make child payments, child support payments if he decides not to care for the child directly. So I think society tries to reflect that, but it doesn't reflect it perfectly because I think partly because of biology, because it's the fact of the matter is still that the woman is doing the work of being pregnant and bringing the child into the world. Uh, and also, I think the other thing that is not reflected is that if you I mean making child payments is hard. Making child support payments is hard, um, but still, it is still not as hard as actually taking care of the child, and making sure she goes to school and all of those things. So there is still a certain kind of there's still a certain kind of imbalance in the whole thing. Yeah, I wonder. I'm just kind of thinking aloud. I'm not sure I'm not sure where what I'm about to say will actually go. Um, Maybe the only way to really equalize the situation would be to change the biology of men and women. If you can imagine a situation in which this is like a science fiction situation, but if you can imagine a situation in which pregnancy is something that happens both to the man and the woman. So maybe it'll be a funny case in which, okay, imagine a world in which when a couple becomes pregnant, both the man and the woman becomes pregnant. So maybe, I don't know, maybe the woman will be responsible for maybe the woman's body is responsible for gestating the lower part of the fetus body, from the waist down, and the man's body is responsible for gestating the upper part of a fetus body from the waist up. So and then maybe maybe the man and woman have to stay together in order to and in order to bring the baby into the world. And when it comes time to deliver the baby, I imagine that both the man and the woman will have to go to the hospital, and they will both have to go into labor. And the you know and the woman will deliver the lower part of the baby, and the man will deliver the upper part of the baby, and then somehow I don't really know how this works, but and then somehow, in the hospital, in the operating ward, in a maternity, it's not even correct to call it maternity ward right now. Maternity slash paternity ward. In the maternity slash paternity ward, the doctors will combine the lower and upper half of the baby together, and then you have a baby. Maybe.
Think of seahorses. I think the male seahorse fertilizes the eggs in the woman, and then the woman gives the fertilized eggs to the man.
Oh, interesting. Yeah. I never thought about that. Matthew?
And maybe I still think that the woman does like most of the work with A, growing the baby, and B, having like a lot of times end up having to be the majority caregiver. Then like this still doesn't equalize it, but I don't think it has to be biologically equal to try to make it more equal legally. Like, we can enforce the fathers, whether that be voluntary or not voluntary or dead, because we do this to deadbeat dads. We make them provide for the children financially. But if we made the father financially responsible for the mother while she's pregnant and then the child after that, then that would allow, then it's still not, this mom's still doing more work, but then it would still be more equitable. It would be moving in the right direction, you know?
I'm with you there, Matthew. I also agree with Lacey, but I think it'll be hard to enforce these things because the man could just say, well, that's not my kid, you know, and dip. And he doesn't have to give a DNA sample or anything. So I think it'll be hard to enforce these things, but it's definitely unfair. And a man should be held responsible because it takes two, right?
Mm-hmm. Just trying to clarify, I personally believe that abortion is a terribly sad thing. I do think it should be legalized, though, because of what you just said. But I feel like there should be more an effort on trying to make it so there's a world where abortion is not needed. I feel that's where the moral argument should be put.
Here. Personally, I realize that there's a loss of life, but I think that a woman should have the right to choose. And me being a gay man, like, I'll never be in a situation to get a woman pregnant ever. So like, why should I even have a say in this? This is none of my business. You know what I mean? Like, it doesn't involve me, if that makes sense.
Yeah, but but it's still good to have your perspective. I suspect that you can see you probably can offer a certain perspective on this situation that we can't. Um, hmm. Yeah, this is
So,
so Prem, sorry.
so what I'm thinking is, why should we have an input on this? Is because the babies cannot stand up for themselves, and we as a moral beings have the moral obligation to stand up for things that can't stand up for themselves. So I kind of do agree that I know that abortion is bad. Like, I agree on the stance of that, and I think that abortion, like, isn't morally justified either, because you are taking a human life away. And I believe in my stance that human life begins in conception, or like soon as the first sperm reaches the egg, that's when human life fully starts to begin. And like, you can't take that away. And even in the cases of rape, I believe like rape is wrong. I completely agree with that. But us to say that we shouldn't be able to have a say in it just because it doesn't interfere or like oblige us is like saying we shouldn't like be able to stand up for it. Like, I think that we should be able to stand up for babies because they can't stand up for themselves.
Okay, over here. I agree with Prem because, well, like you said, like, rape is never a good thing. That's a terrible thing. Things can happen, but why is it if a pregnant woman gets killed, it's a double homicide? Like, they consider the child that is conceived as another being. So why do you have the right to take away that being's life? I get there's instances where there was a huge mistake, or the child is conceived and you don't want it. But I don't think that should be the woman's right. I get it's her body, but I don't think it's okay for her to take another life. That's just what I think.
Lacey on this one as well, because statistically looking on just like the facts perspective of it, with abortions that happen, only I believe 0.5% is rape cases, and pretty much you're justifying other 99.5% of abortions to be right just because of the 0.5, and statistically that just doesn't add up as well. And another thing that I would like to say is, like, a lot of people who do say that abortion is legal and it's a woman's right to choose, and they're pretty much saying like the baby is just a fetus. But the thing is, like, just looking into the like fact of slavery, people said slaves weren't human either. Like, if you can dehumanize something, it's pretty much saying that there's no moral obligation based behind it. So if there's no moral obligation based behind it, then people people can say whatever they want. And if those things that are dehumanized don't have a moral obligation to say anything, then they can't stand up for themselves. So I think that I just think like morally, abortion is unjustified. And like adding rape into it, I believe like rape is terrible. Like nobody should ever have to go through that. But even in the cases of rape, I just believe that the baby should still have a say, because the baby is a production of rape. Like it didn't choose to be made, but it's there now.
Yeah, I think what Thompson is saying is that, well, I think she will. Okay, first she will agree with you, Prem. She will agree with you that that we shouldn't dehumanize fetuses. Fetuses are not. We are not treating fetuses like they are slaves, because slaves are not persons. Whereas she basically admits, she acknowledges from the beginning, that fetuses are persons. Um, and what she's also saying is that, I think she will also agree with you that fetuses are pretty much defenseless beings. And so she will also agree with you that, it is probably true that we have an obligation to defenseless beings. I mean, the law, um, I think, Journey, can you actually mute your what do you call that, the video? Because I think there's some background noise from your video. Okay, thank you. Anyway, so I think Thompson will also agree that we probably have responsibilities to defenseless beings, and yeah, I was going to say something and then I kind of blanked out. Yeah, but she will agree that we have responsibility to defenseless beings, and and so the idea is that if you choose to bring a baby into the world, a fetus into the world, you are doing it because you recognize that you have assumed responsibility, on your own, by your own free will, for this being that is totally dependent and defenseless and dependent on you. And all of that, I think all of that is probably true. But the question comes up. I think the question is, what happens? What happens if you did not intend for the pregnancy to happen? Either because it was a rape, or either because, here's another possibility, right? Another possibility is that maybe you use all the contraception that you can use, and still you got pregnant. So think about this, right? If you use all the contraception that you use and still you got pregnant, you didn't really choose to bring a baby into the world, right? You didn't choose that responsibility. So if you didn't choose that responsibility and you did everything not to have a baby, then then if you do get pregnant, do you actually have a responsibility to bring the baby into the world?
I believe like like you still do have a responsibility, because everyone in the basic knowledge knows that even it says on the back of like many contraceptions, only 99.9% effective. Like there's still a chance that that's going to happen. And just using an analogy, let's just say, for example, you're driving and you get in a crash, but let's just say you don't want to take responsibility for being in the crash. You can choose to like drive away, but there's still going to be consequences behind your actions for every action that you take. And since it's a choice if you want to get an abortion or not, there is morality behind it, since it is a choice. There can be good or bad behind it. But if you look into like factually and statistically on it, it does lead into being more of a morally wrong decision, because you still did choose to do the deed.
Yeah, interesting. Actually, the car crash example is a very good example, because, okay, so I'm sure most people who are in their right minds don't get into a car and drive with the intention of getting into an accident, right? We want to just, drive safely and get where we are going. Unfortunately, accidents do happen. And when accidents happen, insurance comes in, right? And the purpose of insurance is to kind of, how do I say this? The purpose of insurance is to kind of protect you from the consequences of your action, because the idea is that, people recognize that, excuse my language, but people recognize that shit happens, right? Despite your best intentions. And when shit happens, despite your best intentions, the people recognize that we can afford to forgive you for for the shit that happens sometimes. So what insurance does is basically it covers you by not having you, not requiring you to pay for the full cost of the damage that is being done. So I don't know. This sounds like a really terrible thing to say, but I wonder, if you get pregnant despite despite using all the birth control that you can, despite taking all the precautions, what is the equivalent of insurance here, Matthew?
I have a problem of comparing a baby to a car crash because I feel like that's a human being, not an accident, not a damage. But the equivalent is adoption. Like I realize like my aunt and uncle had to go through the adoption paperwork, and it took them like 2 years to adopt their orphaned nephew. So it was a whole, and I realized that there's a lot of things that can be made better in that. I'm not saying that it's perfect yet, otherwise we wouldn't need to have this discussion. But there are other options. And
maybe when you get in a car crash, you pay your premium, right? You pay $500 or whatever, and then they fix your car. Maybe the condom breaks, you pay for an abortion and it fixes it. Like, I don't know.
Yeah, I mean, I'm not saying that.
Does that make sense?
Yes, I mean, yeah. Somebody could say that, right? You could think of an abortion as being like a deductible, like being like the deductible that you pay, and that. I mean, and I'm not trying to, please don't get me wrong. I'm not trying to say that people should go and have an abortion every other day. I mean, there's a difference between, how do I say this? There's a difference between
using it as using abortion as birth control, whereas
precisely, yeah. There's a difference between using birth control as birth control and using abortion as birth control. That's basically what I'm saying.
I think that there's a difference in both the need for, because there are some cases that, so in the case of rape and incest and stuff like that, there are cases where it's understandable if it's legalized. I believe that abortion is never essential, but I do understand that in some cases I wouldn't hold it against someone if they got raped and then they had an abortion. And I feel like it should be legal because it doesn't matter if it's immoral or not, people are still going to do it. So it should be legal and made safe to protect people, but then it should also, but that just because it's legal doesn't make it moral.
Yeah. Good point.
Another perspective, I'm pro-choice, but I'm against, using it as birth control and stuff like that. The problem with the adoption thing is that it's still growing even when she's pregnant. So if she doesn't want the baby, but she can't get an abortion because it's illegal or whatever, who's to stop her from drinking, smoking, not treating it right, and all that stuff, because it's like, forcing somebody to babysit a puppy for 9 months and they're not going to take care of it because they don't want it, Yeah.
Well, here's another thing to think about. Think about Plan B contraception. So if you get if the condom breaks and you decide the next morning that you don't want to risk getting pregnant, and so you go for the Plan B contraception, in theory, In theory, that is also a kind of abortion, right? Because if you think about abortion, I mean, if you think of the fetus as a person from the moment of conception, then the moment you take the Plan B contraception, you might actually already be committing a kind of abortion. I mean, yeah. Mm, so I guess the question is, if you if you decide if you decide to take the Plan B contraception as a solution to this, as an insurance, so to speak, if you decide to do that instead of going through the whole pregnancy and then putting up the baby for adoption later, um, so Plan B contraception versus pregnancy and then adoption. Uh, I guess I don't know what my question is. Maybe my question is Plan B contraception? It sounds like it is probably morally the same as abortion. So is Plan B contraception? If you are okay, so if you're a college student, right, you have a degree to work towards, you have a full life and everything, and you decide that, rather than carrying a baby to term and then putting up for abortion later, you'll be better. You'll be better and less disruptive of my life to just go for Plan B contraception. Uh, I don't know. Is that okay?
I kind of have a problem believing that the whole Plan B, is like abortion, because, like, they say like 50% of like contraceptions don't, stick or whatever, and they just naturally miscarry themselves because the body just, knows that, oh, it's not going to be feasible or whatever, and even like it's like 10 to 15% or something like that of first term fetuses miscarry and stuff like that. So like when it's that early, I don't know. It's difficult because it's the whole, it's still alive from contraception.
Yeah, I think you meant conception.
I agree with Jamie there. I don't know exactly how Plan B works, but I think it stops the fertilized egg from attaching to the uterine wall or something like that. So I like, it's kind of like a condom. Like the thing, it stops the sperm from coming out, but this stops the egg from attaching. Like,
yeah, I mean, if you want to be really fastidious about this, you could try to say, look, Plan B, and I think there really are people out there. Sorry, Matthew, I'll get to you soon. I think there really are people out there who are opposed to Plan B contraception because they say that, look, if a fetus, if there is life from the moment of conception, right? If there is a life from the moment sperm meets egg and becomes an embryo, then Plan B is different from using a condom, because in using a condom, you're preventing the life from forming. Whereas in Plan B, you are ejecting, you are forcibly ejecting out of the body a life that has already been formed. And if that life happens to be a person, then you are forcibly ejecting out of the body a person. Okay, Matthew.
I just wanted to say that there's a little bit of a difference. Again, personally, I think that Plan B should be legal just because laws are not made for the ideal world, but for the world we're living in. But morality is for the ideal world. And I think that it is the difference between a condom and Plan B is that, technically there already is life between the sperm and the eggs, but they're not their own organism. They're not their own human organism. But when they do meet, there's like, biologists consider a fertilized egg its organism, and within the first 15 minutes, because it's already starting to divide and has its own DNA. So I think there is a difference because at that point it is its own human life. However, it's just doesn't seem like a baby, and I don't think it is a baby at that point. It's mostly just embryonic stem cells, but it is still its own human life, and it has the potential to become a baby. So it's kind of and I can understand why there's a morally gray area there.
I think it's gray.
The only opposition I have to that is one of the main ways Plan B works is it delays the egg from ever dropping, so the sperm and the egg don't meet. But another way it works is not by attaching to the walls. So there's two ways it works. So it might not meet the sperm and be as one in the first place.
That's the same way birth control pills work, is it prevents the egg from ever coming out for the sperm to even meet.
Yeah, this is interesting. I was always under the impression that, you know, you take Plan B because the sperm has already met the egg, and it's now just a matter of whether the egg will attach to the wall. I didn't know that it can take so long for the sperm to meet the egg.
Yeah, I think conception takes about 2 weeks. Like after the sex is done, it takes about 2 weeks for the sperm and the egg to fertilize together. And Plan B is usually taken like right after someone notices like there was a problem with the sex or the condom was broken or some sort of that. And as soon as the couple realizes that, they resort to Plan B. So I don't think Plan B is necessarily abortion because the fetus hasn't formed yet. But I do believe that after the fetus is born and you do take other types of contraceptives to stop the pregnancy from happening after like the eggs have attached, I believe that's when abortion like truly starts.
I had a question when I was listening to Prem, but hold on, let's see if I recall it. Well, usually the recommendation for Plan B is that, you know, you're supposed, if you decide to use Plan B, you have to use it within 72 hours after you have had sex, right? And I think the rationale behind this is that 72 hours is what it takes for an embryo to attach itself to, well, you know, to the wall, I think. Yeah. And the 14-day thing is a different thing. 14 days is for the embryo to pass the possibility of twinning. So what happens is that if you're going to have twins, then around day 14 or slightly before that, the embryo is split into two. But which is why most people think of 14 days as the magic number. But I think 72 hours is the time in which the embryo could attach to the wall. The idea is that if you don't act within 72 hours, then the embryo would have attached itself to the wall, and then Plan B wouldn't work. That's what I know anyway. So, and then, you know, the question is, the reason why it's a gray area, as Matthew said, is because, well, if you don't believe that, if you don't believe that an embryo is a person, if you think that it's just a human, if you think that it's just a human cell that is replicating itself, then you wouldn't consider it to be abortion. Because, you know, then if you don't think it's a person, then if you take Plan B and you expel the embryo, you're just expelling a bunch of cells. You know, no big deal. But if you happen to believe that that a person begins at the moment when sperm meets egg, and you believe that the embryo is actually a person, then it becomes morally more problematic, because then when you take Plan B, you are actually expelling a person from, you know, your body and killing that person. And I think what Thompson is saying is that even then, even if you're expelling a person from your body through Plan B, it may not be wrong. You know, if the whole thing happened because of rape, or if the whole thing maybe happened because of an unintended pregnancy, because you took all the precautions you could have taken, then maybe it's still not wrong, even if it happens to be a person that you are expelling from your body. Actually, I forgot to mention this earlier, but Thompson actually, so the cool thing about Thompson's paper, if you haven't read it, please take some time this afternoon to do so. The cool thing about Thompson's paper is that she comes up with all these really colorful examples. Here's another example. There's this thing called the people seeds example. I would tell the story, but it'd be nice to hear from one of you. Does anybody remember what the people seeds example is about? Okay, so here's the example. imagine you live in some kind of weird science fiction world in which there are all these people seats floating around in the air, just like I don't know, just like coronavirus. Okay, so there are all these people seats floating around the air, and for some weird reason, the people seats can attach to furniture, to anything that has a kind of a soft surface like a carpet or maybe like an upholstery. It can attach to furniture, like yeah, it can attach to carpet or upholstery, and then when it attaches to a carpet or upholstery, then it can grow. You will grow into a people after you will grow into a person after it attaches to your carpet. Okay, so in this world, if you don't want to have people growing in your apartment or your house, what you do is you know you put all these fine wire gauze over your windows, so that you can continue to enjoy the scenery from your window. But the fine gauze will prevent the people seeds from coming into your apartment and fertilizing themselves. Okay, but what happens? What happens if sometimes sometimes the gauze is not perfect, right? Sometimes there may be a small hole in the gauze, and so people seeds might go through the small hole and implant themselves onto your carpet or your upholstery and grow into people. Okay, so if you live in this science fiction world, and you do your best to cover your windows with gauze, but sometimes your gauze is faulty and you end up having people growing on your couch. uh, are you now responsible in this case if you have taken all the precautions to prevent people from growing on your couch and they grow anyway? Are you now responsible for letting the people continue to grow on your couch?
I have a problem with this example because it's not like in this example, I would say no, you don't have a responsibility for the people seats.
Mhm.
But there is a choice, not always a choice to have children, but there is a choice to have sex. And again, I don't think, and that's just an inherent risk of that is maybe getting pregnant. And I don't think that that's an punishment, but I do think it is a natural consequence.
Mm.
I agree. Honestly, if you are not ready for a child, just don't have sex.
Don't do it. Okay. Yeah. Well, I don't know. I mean that's great, right? If you can practice, abstinence only. But it's like, how do I say this? Okay. In the case of the people seats, right? Of course you can. It's totally possible to totally prevent people seats from drifting into your apartment if you just board up all your windows. Deprive yourself of the beautiful if you deprive yourself of the pleasure of gazing out your window, by boarding up all your windows, then of course no people seats will ever come in. You're totally safe. So in the same way, well, if you totally deprive yourself of the joy of sex, then of course you will never be at risk of having an unwanted pregnancy. I guess my question is it fair to expect people to totally deprive themselves of the joy of sex just to avoid an unwanted pregnancy?
I think there's a difference in the because if you're boarding up your windows, that's an active choice to not. But you have to, in one case, you have to make an active choice to not. But in real life, you have to make an active choice to open. And I would say that I believe that society as a whole has a responsibility to care for the children, and that means that it may, if you don't want to participate that in an individual level, then that's one thing. But I believe that since this is kids are being born, like since a kid is and pregnancy is a consequence of that, I feel and like I feel like it's an intended risk, like not intended risk, like an unintended risks are still things that should be acknowledged. Like in the medical field, you get, before you can have an operation or anything, there's always, they make sure that you are willing to accept any unintended consequences in it, or that there's inherent risks. And I mean, it sounds very unromantic, but I feel like it's the same way with any, not just with sex, but with any choice you make, there's always unintended consequences and inherent risks. And it's just part of life, is that you have to accept those before you make any choice.
Interesting. Yeah.
I would agree with Matthew on that. So I believe if people choose to have sex, like they choose to have sex, they should be willing to accept the rewards or the consequences behind it. Like if they want the reward of being able to have sex, they should also be able to accept the consequences of like being able to take care of a baby if they're not like ready to. Ultimately, I believe it like comes down to the choice of it. Because if you look into it and if you can just be like, well, if you don't want the baby, you can just throw it away, then what is the point of human life? There's no value to human life attached at all. Like if we just have the mindset that we can just throw away something that we don't like because of our actions don't justifiably end up to what we want it to be, then we're pretty much having the mindset that just because something doesn't work, we can just throw it away. And if we have the mindset towards that of a human life, then it's pretty much proclaiming that human life has no value at all. And if you like look into it a little bit further, a lot of these kids, like if they do end up having sex, like okay, like I don't judge them at all. But what I do think is unright is just because you're not ready and your actions dictate you to have a baby, like it's not morally right for you to just throw away another life.
I think you'd be right there, but I think maybe education. Like this is anecdotal evidence, but my grandmother, she was 16 when she got married. She had no idea what sex was, and my mom and dad, they're pro-life people. They teach abstinence only, but I had no idea what sex was. And if I didn't have sex education in school, I would have no idea. You know what I mean? And I think a lot of the statistics based on abortion by country back it up. Countries that have higher rates of abortion also have low education.
Well, I don't know. I'm gonna say something pretty controversial here, and you might think of me of a monster for saying this, but you were talking about human life and everything, Prem, and it like has no value or whatever with that decision. But from my perspective, I would say life is only given value if you give it value or it gives itself value. And so as a fetus or anything, I would say, I mean, I could be wrong, it doesn't really know itself, it's just kind of existing. Like, I don't think, I can't remember, I can't recall experiences when I was, a small child or when I was in the womb. And so I wouldn't say I was giving myself value because I couldn't think of myself, but my parents gave me value. Therefore, I was a valued life and, could have meaning, and I was, a human or whatever. And so to get rid of it, it means you don't value it and it can't really value itself. And so I mean, you shouldn't just, go doing it willy-nilly. Still accept, that you have to make that choice because, some people, naturally, if you have a child in you, you can immediately be like, oh, this is a living thing. I have, value or whatever. But in a lot of cases, you can just not care about it. And it would actually almost be better to, just not bring it into the world rather than bring it into the world and have a terrible life, whether it's being neglected or just being, have a go around between foster parents or whatever. I just think, human life only has value if you give it value or if someone else gives it value.
Okay, question. So,
response to that, I
uh,
would say.
Let's see what Lacey has to say first. It looks like she has a question.
sorry. So who's to say that you have the right to take away that I don't know how to put this. Who's to say that you have a right to decide that child's future? Like, why should you take away the chance for them to experience that when you don't even know if that'll be what their life is going to be like, you know? Like, why take away the opportunity, you know? Why take away there's so many different ways this child could go. Like, why should you be the one that decides where they're going to go?
Are you for gay marriage, Lacey?
Am I for
people make decisions like this that affect other people and they don't know the outcome or anything. You know what I mean? Like, this is another example. Does that make sense?
Yeah. Well, I mean, I feel like for me personally, I'm pro gay marriage. You know, you do your own thing. But I mean, in this instance, if you're taking away the child's life, then you're taking away their opportunity to experience their own thing. Why should you have the right to do that?
Well, up until, they're, while they're still infants and everything, you have to make all the decisions for them, really. You're doing everything for them. And so if you, are, you don't feed it or you don't, care for it, then, that's just how it's going to be because it can't do anything for itself. And then, it develops later. If they come out as a fully rational human being that can care for itself, then yeah, don't get rid of it because then it can create its own life and do things. But when you are in full control over its life, and if it's, in your body for 9 months and everything, and it can't do anything for itself, I would, you could make that decision for it.
I think a lot of people don't. Every action that you decide or every decision that you make should be positive and pro-life for that child. And then once you no longer want that responsibility, because people do put children up for adoption, there are always people in this world who are going to take in that child. Whether I know the process of adoption is complicated and hard, and the process of being a foster child is hard, but why can't that child get that opportunity? You know?
I kind of agree with you, Lacey, but like the problem was saying, oh, you should just be positive when you're pregnant, and everything you decide should be positive for the baby. The problem is that a lot of times it's not, and making somebody try to do that is kind of like, what are you going to do? Live with them and make them, take their prenatals and, not drink and all that kind of stuff.
Kind of go with what Jamie was saying there about you can't make them. I agree with that, and like that's the real reason why like laws have to allow for how humans are actually going to act. But there's also kind of building on the education is you can build to a better world where that is not the case, where if you can teach people to value other human beings just as much as they value themselves. Like, obviously we're not there. I definitely am not perfect at that. I am selfish too often, I think, but that's why I think that legally I'm pro-choice, because laws have to be realistic, but you can teach and work towards something that wouldn't work now, but would work in the future. And
yeah. I think I get a sense that Brecken's point is something like this, and the point is that we live in a world in which many children are born, but they are not valued. And sometimes they are not valued because of neglect. Sometimes they are not valued because of all kinds of social circumstances that that deny them a good education or something like that. Think about all the poverty, in the cities and things like that. So maybe the question, maybe I get it. I get a sense. I don't know if this is correct, but maybe the sense is that if you are going to bring people into the world, then we should make sure that we can value them. And if we can't, maybe it's not such a good idea to bring people into the world. Is that kind of what you're saying, Bracken?
I think most of the politicians that are pro-choice, once the baby's born, they're forgotten. Their values lost. They don't invest in social programs that will help that child. You know what I mean? Especially because most of the unwanted children are born into poverty.
Yeah. Well, sorry. I know this. I know it's 12:15. But here's something else that I kind of want you guys to maybe think about a little bit. So I was using the people seats example, and I was kind of bringing up the idea that should you be deprived of the joy of having sex just because you don't intend to have children? And one answer is, of course, maybe one answer is no. I mean yes. The sex is for having children, or you should at least accept that one very big consequence of sex will be having children. But I thought that what was interesting. I thought it was interesting that Carson brings up the example that his grandma got married at 19. I think there was a time, right? There was a time when most people got married in their teens, and what that means is that you kind of you get married and get established in the world at the same time as you mature sexually, and when that happens, what happens is that you get into an arrangement like a marriage in which your sexual needs are more or less taken care of. But we live in a different world now where most of us don't get married in our teens. So unfortunately, we still have sexual needs, even though we don't have the previous arrangement that would take care of the sexual need, marriage. So I guess what I'm trying to say is that if you now find ourselves caught in a situation where we have these needs, sexual needs that need to be fulfilled, but we don't have the institution that would originally fulfill them, like marriage. I'm not trying to say that marriage is only for fulfilling sexual needs, but it is it's one of the things that marriage does, right? You get married and have sex and have children. But now that you're not getting married and having sex and having children, then what do you do with those sexual needs? And if you're not in a good position to have children right now, but you still have those sexual needs, then I don't know. I mean, one answer to that would be just to not have any sex, right? Deny your sexual needs until you're ready to do it, until you're ready to get married. But I don't know. I don't have any answers to this question. I'm just throwing it out there for you guys to kind of ponder.
We have hands for a reason, I guess.
Masturbate. Cough, cough.
How interesting. Please don't do it on Zoom, okay? I don't know if you know that story about Jeffrey Toobin. But hands, how interesting. Okay, well, let's meditate and ponder on that. And okay, I need to let you go because it's 12:15. Thank you so much for being on Zoom with me today. And we'll meet again on Zoom on Thursday. Thanks. Bye bye.